One of my greatest joys is knowing the reach and the impact that our team has through this podcast. And as we go places and travel the world, people are like, man, that podcast helped my team, helped me. And so I love that it's adding value. To your point, that's a core principle of what we do. It is adding value to people. So when he talks about job security, I'm looking forward to today because I got a couple questions for you. You've had the opportunity to just ride shotgun and carry this legacy for John, also be mentored by him. He is your leader. He is our leader, but you have the interactions with him on a daily basis. And when we talk about adding value, I think there's a couple of things that I've seen you do. You understand your leader's goals. Okay, so you want to add value to John. You understand his goals. You also understand his communication style and how you need to communicate to him and how he likes to receive communication. I think those are just two small things that I've observed and I've seen you do with John that in essence have added value to John as your leader. Again, then you look at it and go, okay, this is job security for Mark because he's going about it that way. That's not your motive behind why you're doing it, but that's what you are doing. Talk a little bit about as you have gone through the years of developing as a leader, and now as you lead our entire enterprise, how are you continually adding value to your leader, your mentor, John, in order, we'll use this throughout today, to have job security? I don't think you're going anywhere, but that's not the mindset, but that's not why you do it, but you do that. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it goes to this concept. Many of you listening to the podcast, you've heard John teach on being unforgettable. And the whole time we're talking about job security, I'm thinking of, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about John saying, hey, always be unforgettable.
Get out of the pile.
Get out of the pile. Yeah. And if you've seen it and you're listening to the podcast, John's recently now illustrating that.
Oh, no.
It's a whole nother level, Chris. You got to get on the road with me.
Is it just me, or the older John gets, his illustrations
are a little bit, well, he is becoming more comfortable in his skin. Yeah. And so anyway, he's doing this whole, just in the last 2 weeks, we've been traveling all over the world, and he's doing this bit of getting out of the people pile. But what he's really talking about, that's very apropos to us today, is this concept of be unforgettable. And when you have job description, job security, it's because there's something that you've done that makes you unforgettable. I'm talking with Macy right now. She's going into her senior year. She's got 3 or 4 things that now is going to be up for her to have in the way of leadership. Cheer captain. She's a part of HOSA, a student-led youth organization that she's up for consideration for the president of HOSA. She's got a couple other things that now that they kind of reserve for seniors, and now it's her turn next year, right? And I was going, Macy, what did you do today that makes the people that's voting tomorrow remember you when it's time to vote?
Wow. Good.
And it's the question, do you want it? And she does. She's a competitor. She's a little fireball. She wants the limelight. She wants to be recognized. And I'm going, it's not about what you did all along often that gets you there. What it is sometimes is, what did you do in the last interaction to make you memorable for the next moment? Right. And I think that's true in this place, in what we're talking about with John. I have a question for our podcast listeners, Chris, that I wrote down as we were listening. How are you adding value to the team, your leader, and the organization? Let me ask it a different way. When was the last time you added tangible, memorable value to those around you? And if you can't remember, then it's probably time for you to go do something unforgettable.
Yeah.
If you can't remember the last time you did something that was tangible value that you brought to the team, then I'm going to challenge you that you need to up your game. Recently, John and I were traveling, and we were watching. We're a LeBron James fan. I know he's political. I know there's people that love to hate LeBron. A lot of times when you're the best, you don't like him. But I have a very personal story. A friend of ours that connected me to LeBron James when LeBron James was 14 years old playing. So I'm a LeBron James fan. I'm not agreeing with all the stuff that makes all of you frustrated. And most of the time I don't like the top dog because I like the underdog. But we were watching, and it was the game to where one of the young kids from Memphis, the young kids were saying, I'm not going to respect LeBron James. He's just an old man. Until he scores 40 again, I'm not even going to respect him. We watched the game. That guy got thrown out of that game, by the way. I'm sorry I can't remember all these names. He got thrown out of the game right after he had said that. And my point in saying this, that guy became unforgettable to LeBron James because of what he said. We as leaders on a team will have greater job security if we do things that are memorable that gets us out of the people pile.
That is good. Yeah, what I love about that and that example is, by the way, we'll do it in a positive way.
Oh,
or maybe in this situation, a negative way, just
That's
like
right.
influence. Either way, it is going to happen. It reminds me, as you're talking to, John wrote an incredible book, The 360-Degree Leader, where he talks about leading up, lightening your leader's load. What does that look like? Same thing with peers, same thing with your organization. And I love that he started this lesson with let's add value to people, because that's what we're all about. He quickly moves into the second point, which is our point number one in our notes. And well, I can't wait to talk to you about this, because I know we joke around the Maxwell Leadership about here comes Mark and his urgency, his passion, his fire, whatever he wants, we change the name of it. But I love this because we can't have that type of job security unless we are acting urgently inside the organization. I oftentimes will hear people talk about, oh, this is the quiet quitting. And John mentioned that briefly. That quiet quitting is just a new phrase in today's terms of what people are doing just basically to stay on the payroll and get a paycheck. There's no urgency about that. So why would leaders and organizations and people want those team members to be around? They probably wouldn't when push came to shove. I like this statement of treat yourself as an internal consultant. If you were, and you spent some time consulting, and if you were treating yourself as an internal consultant to Maxwell Leadership, to Mark Cole, to John Maxwell, your approach for urgency would be a whole lot different than, hey, I'm just along for the ride. I'm just a team member. You have a pace and a sense of urgency. So does John Maxwell. So does our organization. Talk a little bit again here about this and why that's so important to you as a leader. When you see that, I want to switch it, not what you learned from John. When you see that in other people in and or around your team.
Yeah, people do what they see. People follow leaders that resonate with them. And so often we have leaders that are silent in their urgency, or silent in their passions, or silent in their expectations. So they don't have this sense of urgency. They don't have this sense of clarity. They don't have this sense of expectation on their teams. Therefore, they sit there and go, well, my team will never, my team doesn't, my team isn't. And by the way, those of you that work for a leader, often you do that too. Well, my boss won't. They won't let me. I don't have the resources. I don't this. Anytime that you put the focus on the other, you abdicate the responsibility that it is yours to accomplish. That's why John's last little statement in this is one of the worst mistakes anyone can make is to think he or she is working for someone else. It's about working for yourself. What's your sense of pride? What is your sense of commitment to yourself and bringing your best to the game? Recently in our organization, I had the privilege of showing a mirror to one of my brilliant teammates. I mean, this teammate and I have came through a lot together, accomplished a lot together. And for several reasons, they had allowed themselves to silently quit, put themselves on the sidelines. And I just had a breakfast, and I just kind of brought a figurative mirror, and I said, hey, let me tell you what I'm observing the last 3 meetings I've been in. Have I heard your voice once? Have I heard this? Yeah, I've kind of put myself on the sideline because of this person, that person, that person. So that person has this was my next question when I popped the mirror back up, and I said, so this person that I'm looking at, they have this person that I have to look at, that I'm looking at, you, has given somebody else the ability to shut them down or to speed them up. And this individual went, thank you for that. They never even said you're right or anything. They went, thank you for that. This immediate turnaround from that individual and their performance is remarkable, Chris. I think a lot of leaders don't know what to do with silent quitting, the lack of urgency, the challenge within people. Oftentimes, the best thing we can do with a quality individual is just hold a mirror in front of them. Say, do you know that I have observed this activity from you? Do you know that you are exhibiting yourself that way? Rather than come and say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? We get very aggressive, or we get very paralyzed. I have found just a candid conversation with somebody to say, hey, this is what your silent quit image looks like to me. And there is this awakening that happens.
That is good. And when you talk about having that sense of urgency, it comes across differently in different people. And that's okay. They all have different leadership styles, but there's got to be that movement. There's got to be that momentum. There's got to be, to your point, okay, let's not blame it on somebody else. Let's say, what have you done about that? And so it'd be different if someone came to you or to me or some other leader and said, hey, feel like I'm a little stifled here. Here's 3 things I've done out of a little bit of urgency. I don't think this is working. Do you have any thoughts for me? Completely different approach than just being put on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So I love that illustration. John goes into the second one where I want to spend some time here, where he says, show a positive effect on the organization, on the leader, whatever that might look like. And then he gives us 2 points here for those who do the work and then those who take the credit. I won't ask you which one you prefer on those two. But when I think about this, I think that this is really this is part of our culture. What does your culture look like? Is it a culture where people are doers? Are they getting the work done? And it reminded me of, you challenge us with +1 when it comes to productivity inside the organization. And it may fluctuate on a budget or whatever it is, but man, year over year, what is that +1? And by the way, if you're doing that, that has a positive effect. So when it comes to production and that positive effect on the organization and or the individual as a leader, how does that help create job security in your eyes?
Well, we've heard John say on this podcast maybe multiple times, when you can afford to quit, you can't afford to quit, right? And it's interesting to me, the way that you worded that question from what you pulled from John is because when you have made it, it's when you can't afford to settle back and say, I've made it. Macy doesn't listen to every one of these podcasts, so I'm going to pick on her again. Macy, I mentioned her just a few moments ago in the podcast, but she's going into 12th grade. She has been cheering now for 12 years or 11 years. The next year will be her 12 years. Hard worker, disciplined. Like, I'm telling you, don't miss and don't ever show up without knowing her things. Well, she's 12th grade. She might be cheering in college, but she's kind of done. And so just right before we listened to John talk, you heard me on the phone talking to my wife because there's something we're supposed to go to, and my wife and I are dividing and conquering so we can support Macy. And Macy's texting and said, none of us want to go. Y'all don't need to go. I don't want to go. None of you need to go. I text Macy back and I said, Macy, you want to act like a team member or a leader? Your choice. And she replied back, she said, why do you always have to ask those questions? Here's what I'm saying to Macy. Macy does not have to show up to this event tonight. You know why? She's shown up to 11 of them. But right when she can afford to coast because she's done it, she has an aspiration to be seen as a leader. And leaders show up when they don't have to.
Yeah.
Not when they need to. We know the whole story. Hey, leaders, you got to show up. Yeah. You got to show up. Well, you know what? I believe leaders show up when they don't have to. They've already paid the price. They've already done it. But guess what? They +1 it. Guess what? I'm going to show up again, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to +1 this thing that even though I've paid the price, I'm still going to pay the price again. And what I'm trying to tell Macy, if you listen this time, baby, I love you. I'm proud of you. But what I want you and I to do is, as leaders, in this world of silently quitting, in this world of doing what is required of us, let's have a +1 mindset. Let's have an attitude that says we're going to put forth positive effort that we don't even have to because we've done it. And then we'll go back to what John and Tyler Perry talked about is when you can afford to quit, you have arrived, you have succeeded, you have paid the price. You can't afford to quit because that +1 for Macy as a senior, to all them underclassmen that's going to show up tonight because they're so excited. They can't wait. They're good. But when a senior shows up and one of a few seniors show up, that +1 don't equal 1 anymore. It equals a multiple. Because you've paid the price, you're still showing up. It speaks greater volumes when you don't have to show up and yet you still show up.
And it's increasing her influence and making her, back to your first point, unforgettable to those that are looking up to her in and around. So, Macy, I hope you go tonight. I hope you're listening to the podcast. I want to end with this last question for you, kind of off the cuff. You know, John gives us, this is part 1, by the way, of a 2-part lesson. So I hope you'll join us for our next session where we'll talk about the last 5. On this lesson, John gives us three others that that I hope you just took notes. I hope you downloaded the Learner's Guide and just made your own notes about show a willingness to do more, show unique skills. What is your unique skill set? And then show efficiency in what you're doing. As we transition from this first one to the next one, when you think about your journey and your years of leadership, what do you think is the one thing that comes to mind that has given you, again, we're using this word job security. It's not a language that we use around here often, but it's in this title. And so just using it in the title, what do you think is the one or two things that may or may not be on this list, this lesson from John, that kind of gave you that job security?
You know, this is a great question from a timing standpoint. I didn't know you were going to close on this. We didn't discuss it. I just finished a 2-week stint with John to where we spent about 30 hours on the plane, he and I. I mean, and this particular experience allowed us to have a lot of conversation time. In fact, not talking would have felt a little awkward. It was just this close proximity. And it was good because I went through about a year and a half of my leadership. Those of you that are in the podcast family, you've heard some of the mistakes and hopefully some of the successes that we've had. But one of the things that I've learned, Chris, is the wealth of knowledge in John Maxwell. And everybody listening and watching on the podcast, just kind of go, oh gosh, for me, okay? Just kind of go, are you kidding me? That's the best you've got. I've traveled with John I've been on his team for 23 plus years. Been a CEO for 13 years. He has personally mentored me and fulfilled all of my mentoring needs. And somehow I got off point of letting him mentor me where I am now, as if I still needed to be mentored the way that I was before. It's a long conversation. We'll unpack it in another podcast. But in this session with John, in this most recent trip that we had, John looked at me about 15 hours in, and with tears in his eyes. It was a very sweet moment. And he said, I have missed you. And I said, that was sweet. And I hugged him. We hugged it out. And I said, what did you miss the most? He said, I miss your coachability. He said, when I didn't have you close to me, I didn't realize how hungry you are to learn. And I started looking at you from a distance saying, I guess he's got it all figured out. And I had a perception of you, even though we've been together this long, that you had lost your hunger to learn. And he said, the greatest thing on this trip that I have discovered is you still love to learn. Now, let's go back to your question. I love to watch a situation and pull something from it that makes me better. I believe the way that I got a promotion in John Maxwell's world came in my very first plane ride, to make this full circle, when I was riding with John and 4 leaders between me and John. And John began to ask questions of something that he wanted, and none of the leaders around him knew the answer. And Chris, I just took note and I went, wow, if I ever get a chance to ride in the plane with John again, I'm going to know the answer to those 4 questions. He asked 4. There was not an answer for any of them. All 4 of them was, I'll get it. I'll find out. We'll know it when we land. We got that. And I watched that and I went, huh. I just took it up. And so I took down those 4 things. It just happened that I won another contest of filling an event. And I got to go about 3 weeks later on another trip with basically the same people minus one of them. I went to the questions John asked, I did research, and I found the current day to date answers to that. And I handed it to the senior most leader on the group. And I said, hey, I don't know if John's going to ask this, but if he does, here's answers. Sure enough, he came on, he asked the exact same questions. And I watched this leader pull out my little form, my little slip, and give John every one his answers. John said, thank you. Thanks for knowing your answers. I appreciate that. The guy circled back with me, which was typically very uncharacteristic of him, and he went, how did you know that? And I said, well, I didn't. I just know that's what he wanted it last time, and I was just prepared. Here's the illustration. I have made my life of leadership about observing others and trying to learn from them. I do not sit here today because of my education. I don't sit here because I had a lot of business experience before John. I sit here because I'm a constant observer, learner, and applier to what I experience today so that I'll be better for it tomorrow.
Good.
Well, thanks, Chris. But here's the whole thing that we're watching. I'm going to close with this because our time's up. But hey, if you like this, John's got 5 more for you next week. So join us again next week. But Chris, I'm going to talk about you for a minute because our friend Jeff Henderson, a thought leader, he has the statement: the best gift you can give your company is a better version of you. And you're living in a time of your leadership. I've been around you for 20 plus years, watched your leadership. You're living in the best times of your leadership. Your podcast, the podcast that you use, is like going gangbusters. What's that podcast?
Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast.
It's the executive podcast that will help you in an executive context in a corporate environment to lead better. It's killing it. And I get feedback about your podcast everywhere I go now. You're living your best life as far as last year was one of your personal best as a producer, as a leader, as an earner. I think we started reaching some high numbers. You're at a personal best. What I love is you and I just took on a new task together. We finished up a meeting to come down here and record podcast. And I watched you not settle on the results and success you're having with your existing team, but step in and challenge yourself to be better for the next team. You could start this leadership new assignment with yesterday's reconnaissance, but I watched you stand in front of that group today with a newfound hunger and willingness to say, guys, I don't know half of what I'm supposed to do, so you guys please help me. All of us needs to understand what Jeff Henderson's saying here, and that is the best thing you can do for your organization is not take another promotion, not make another sale. All of that's good. Please do that, especially if you're working for our company. We need some more sales. But the best thing you can do is to better yourself, because that best version of yourself will give you job security and will give you a sustainability that makes you unforgettable to those that make the decision on who should be on the team and who should not be on the team. I'm reminded, Chris, of Albert Einstein's quote that says, "Strive not to be a success, but rather to be of value." Sounds like John Maxwell
100%
lives that life. And so today we kind of always do this standout statement, something that'll really drive the point, the desired outcome of the podcast. And today it's really about give others your best self. I have committed my life to helping others reach their full potential. And this whole concept that before I can do that, I've got to be effective. I've got to be of value to the team. I've got to show that I really do want job security. And so we're picking that back up today, and it's good to be back with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me back. I love this, and I often think about, this is my favorite content piece of John's, but I think a lot about John's 5 levels of influence, the 5 levels of leadership, and how you move in between these different levels, and you're continually growing. And as I think about that and the points that John has brought to us, not only in today's lesson as we go through kind of 6 through 10, but what we talked about last episode. And by the way, I know Mark mentioned it in the opening, but if you haven't listened to that, you want to go listen to that, because Mark shares a story at the end of that lesson that not many people know about, one of the things to where he was prepared and he was on a plane ride with several other leaders. And so you want to go listen to that, because I promise you it will resonate. We're gonna start right here where John talks about show that you add value. And as I think about this a little bit, and I love where he started off in that quote that he put in the notes for us, where it says the verb of your job is everything. The verb, not your title, not your business card. And as I thought more about this is what kind of led me to the 5 levels of influence. This is really about increasing your influence inside the organization. And when you do that, you have job security. Yeah. We've often kicked around the idea of, what if all of us were on a 1-year contract? I had, where this comes from is, I had a gentleman one time in a small group, part of my church, and he said, what if your wife every year made the decision whether or not she wanted to re-up or not for another year? Like, that was our tradition, our custom. I was like, well, I wouldn't be sitting here being married for 25 plus years, right? It wouldn't have worked. But man, what if we had that mindset of our influence, of our production, of our adding value, that we would part ways? You think about athletes. You and I talk a lot about Sports Illustrated. What happens in contract year? They kill it.
They play so much better.
So are we, in thinking about job security, really going after that. And I know that you've seen that. I know that you take that approach in what we're doing. But talk a little bit about John's point there and what resonates with you most as a leader.
Well, I wrote down 2 questions. I will challenge our podcast family with these 2 questions. And it's this. It's very directed to you. What are you producing for the organization? What are you producing? When is the last time you've produced? What are you producing? And then the second question is another verb. What are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing today to make yourself invaluable? When I was listening to John teach this today, Chris, I thought, show that you add value. And I've been around the people that talk about themselves too much, right? I mean, let me tell you what I just did. Let me tell you what I've done. I've also been around people that never demonstrate or never point out that they get that they're adding value. In other words, they're the silent person over on the right, and their actions speak more than words. I get all of that. But I think there's sometimes leaders that we've got to get over our sense of humility, and we got to point out that we understand what value is and that we see times that we add value. In other words, show that we add value. Let me tell you how I've added value. Now, John's very good at this, and a lot of times people go, man, he talks about himself a lot. It's never to get the self gratification or self-appreciation or to put the limelight on himself that drives John to do that. We do that as leaders not to get credit. We do that to model expectation. And I have found that sometimes as a leader, the temptation to just do it and not let anybody notice it, and I'm speaking directly to you because this is truly you, we do it and we don't do it for credit. We do because it's the right thing. But by not establishing credit, we don't get it modeled in our team. We always go, why can't my team do what I'm doing? It's because they may not be observant to what you're doing. So I've had to sometimes go, hey, team, let me tell you this. I have taken on this sacrifice. Now, I didn't tell them that for them to feel sorry for me. In fact, sometimes I can remember doing that, and the sacrifice was not that great. It was kind of laughable that I had to mention it. The only reason I mention that and bring credit or praise to myself when I show people that I am adding value is so that it will be modeled. So my real challenge to you in this whole comment, Chris, to you, because you need to hear this, and to others, is never share or show that you're adding value for self-glorification or self-edification. But don't be afraid to do it if the model needs to be given so that it's demonstrated throughout the team.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about there. And there's no doubt that the key word for us to remember in this, and this is where John, you and I have known him for a long time, so I know where this stands with him. But as you think about this, Mark is not talking about the boasting side of things. It's all about our motive, right? And we've said before, there's a fine line, between influence and then manipulation. One is self-serving, the other one's focused on others, and that the difference is the motive. So remember, yes, you want job security. That's what we're trying to help you with here with John's lesson and unpack this and apply it a little bit for you. But man, have the right motive behind why you're doing what Mark's doing. That's in essence what he's talking to us about doing. Well, let's jump to this next point that John talks about here, and where it reminded me of a conversation that either you've had with me or John, where you come in and someone turns in their resignation, and you have one of two feelings. You go, all right, it's time to move on. That made it a little bit easier on me as a leader. Let's just be honest. Not everybody likes to have those conversations. The other one is, oh God, like you're sick to your stomach, where they are almost irreplaceable inside their organization. And John goes down and he gives us, kind of 2 questions here. Can they or will they? And I want you to unpack the importance of these 2 questions, because I think they cannot stand alone, right? You can have ability, but if you don't have the right attitude, the culture is going to weed you out. And then vice versa. And I know that you've seen this throughout your leadership. Why are these 2 questions so important to you as a leader inside the culture of your organization?
Yeah, I think, again, we're talking about this idea of irreplaceable when John's teaching this. Can they or will they? By the way, if you heard last week's podcast, episode 1, part 1 of this 2-part series, Chris was concerned that we selected this lesson because we had something to tell him, that he was replaceable.
It's intervention.
And I was going to, you said intervention, and I was going to bring out the pink slip and let you go. When you're sitting there just then talking about, should I stay or should I go? I'm sitting there going, is he getting ready to resign right here on the podcast? So touche.
Okay, there you go.
Touche.
Got your back.
Okay. No, seriously. I think what we're really doing here is trying to demonstrate irreplaceable. How do I make myself irreplaceable? As a leader, when I'm interviewing somebody, I have to answer the question, can they, ability, will they, do they have the attitude that I want? But now we're talking about somebody on the team. They've been there, done that. They have charged the mountain. They've accomplished the summit. They've done some stuff for us. How do you stay irreplaceable?
That's good.
Because often what people do is say, yes, I can. Look. Yes, I will. Look, I did it. I did it. That's not here. If your attitude is not daily and consistently, I can and I will, not I did and I won't do it again, or I did and don't ask me that again. I did it once. You have made yourself replaceable for the organization, because this attitude is not about have they done it before? It's can they do it today and in the future for the organization?
Good.
The question is not will they, based on have they done it before? Is there a demonstrable passion that they have brought to the table? The question is the passion still there? Because I have found that a lot of times when leaders have accomplished something great, they begin to coast. When leaders have demonstrated great sacrifice, they begin to hoard. It's what Bill Gates said, that tomorrow's success is often jeopardized with today's success. In other words, good today stops us from great tomorrow because we settle in for that. Well, these great leaders that have accomplished great things, they lose their will they. They lose their can they based on yesterday's payday. And what we don't want to do, podcast listeners, what we don't want to do, leaders, is not answer the question with a historical reference, but with a passion and a hope for the future reference. I can again, I will again. And often we find ourselves looking too much at the past resume of someone rather than the current passion and desire of someone when we look at their replaceability or not.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this image as you're talking of driving a car. And we talk about rear view mirror versus looking out the front windshield. And I'm like, yeah, when I'm in the rear view mirror, I'm thinking about who's in the back seat, what's behind me, what all this stuff versus to your point. And I love this illustration. And leaders, if you're out there, man, the more you can be looking out that front windshield and thinking about what is it that I can help do the organization? How can I help my leader? What's next? What can we be doing differently? That will make you irreplaceable.
I wish I had this, and I should stop the podcast right now and go research it. I read a report one day that of all the wrecks that happen from somebody rear-ending somebody, over some big percentage, 65% or 70%, is they are looking in the rearview mirror and do not see the traffic stopped. Now, if that's true, and I got to go find this now because I'm all fired up, but it's fascinating that most of the wrecks that happen with rear-ending somebody is not that they stopped too fast, not even just that you were following too close. It's you momentarily took your eyes off of where you're going to look at where you have been and you crash. It's true in leadership. It's true in being replaceable or irreplaceable in a company. Too often we want yesterday's success to open the door of opportunity for tomorrow, and I don't believe that's true. I believe today's tenacity, hope, and energy is what opens the door for tomorrow, not what happened yesterday.
Yeah, that's awesome. We need to look that study up. We're going to do a leadership lesson on that in the future. Listen, if you follow along, and we want to thank you again for those that are a part of this podcast world. Because of you, we're able to have impact on people around the world. It's where we get our comments, our contents, and we're grateful. You're probably used to everything that we talk about is in our show notes. Well, we got a little surprise for you.
Yeah.
If you have not downloaded the show notes, you need to go download them because Jake, our producer of our podcast, got a little surprise in there for you. John lists out 10 things that he finds in irreplaceable people. We're not going to share them with you today. John didn't share them with you on the audio. You got to go download the show notes.
I love that.
And you'll see those 10 things in there.
Terrific lesson was to work hard. My father was a very hard worker. In fact, he worked full time until 95. And he loved work. So work wasn't work to him. And it just literally came right down through the family. And for my brother, my sister, and myself, we all love to work. And work isn't work. And we find our mission, we find our passion, and it's just, we can hardly wait to do it. So he was an incredible example of working hard. But he also, in that working hard teaching he did, he taught us to work smart. It's not only how hard you work, but it's how smart you work. And one of the things that he did that was just very helpful, I think this helped me the most in the family because I was a fun-loving kid and not highly disciplined. I really wanted to do two things: play ball and be with my friends. And so my father would give me the chore list, and what he would do is he would give it to me at the beginning of the week and say, John, here are the 5 things you need to do this week, and some of them I had to do every day, like take out the garbage. But then, like, clean the basement or wash the car. I didn't have to do that every day, but I had to do it that week. And my father would say, now, you can choose when you want to do this. If you want to, you can, in fact, if you got the list, you can go down and clean the basement now. You can go out and wash the car now. Or you can do it tomorrow. Or you can do it the next day. He said, you get to choose when you do that work. But he said, I just want you to know by Saturday at noon, it has to be done. And they'd say, Saturday afternoon, we're going to maybe go swimming. If you got your chores done, you can go swimming with us. But if your chore isn't done, you got to finish your chores. And I can still remember the day on Saturday afternoon when the rest of the family pulled out in the car, and I was at the front door watching them leave me because I hadn't cleaned the basement. And Dad said, well, you didn't prioritize your time, so you clean the basement, we'll go swimming. It was my dad that taught me how to pay now, play later. Huge teaching in my life. In fact, he said, let me tell you something. If you pay now, you'll get a play later. But if you just play now, you'll severely pay later. And he talked to me about how doing the right thing compounds into something positive and gives you options at the end. But if you don't do the first things first, you lose your options. And then toward the end of life, the payment really gets compounding and quite severe and difficult. So my dad just came alongside of me and helped me to understand how to put first things first, how to work hard, how to prioritize my work, and pay now, play later. And it was an incredible lesson for me that just literally, it's just literally revolutionized my life. And to this day, I'm an early riser and I wake up early. And, 5:30, I'm already getting my work done. In fact, my dad used just to say, John, it's just very simple. He said, if you rise early and you work and you prioritize your life well, he said, by the time everybody else is getting up, you're already ahead in the game. In fact, he said, be a person that everybody around you has to play catch up. I love that. In other words, he said, get started first. He was the first person to teach me it's not the fastest person that wins the race. It's the one who starts first. So work hard, work smart, get up early. It was just an incredible, incredible lesson that I packed away in my life and I learned for myself. And it's made a huge difference, no doubt about it.
Some people hesitate. I've known leaders who have hesitated from talking about values in the workplace because they think, oh, well, maybe that's a religious thing, or maybe that's something if they're not a religious person or they're not a person of faith, and they don't know that line. So can you maybe talk a little bit about how that, because our values, everyone has values, whether you're a person of faith or whether you're not a person of faith, everyone values something and values character traits. So can you maybe talk about how you bring values into the workplace, into your place of business, into your team, and how you do that not just to your team, but in hiring and onboarding? It's kind of a big question.
I love this question, though, and I'm telling you again, we did not prepare this before we started recording. But something you said really struck me and brought a conversation I had 9 months ago to my memory. This year I had this conversation, so I'm going to break that out for you in this question of I believe values are human.
Right.
I believe values are universal. I believe there are certain values that when lived out with authenticity, not with manipulation, not to get something back, there are certain values that when we as humans live those values out, it's higher than your religious persuasion or beliefs. It's higher than your political beliefs. It's higher than your business beliefs. There are values. Now, I think every business needs to have the things that are core, cornerstone, foundational beliefs of its organization.
Yes.
Those are values too. But let's talk about these people that are scared of values because they sound too religious or too concerned with saying their personal values in a corporate context when others may value something different.
Right.
One is, this is the conversation that you reminded me of when you said this. I'll never forget this. This was probably the most humorous, impacting, sad conversations I've had this year. I was in a community. I won't tell you the community because the person may listen to the podcast. People in the community may listen to the podcast. We were in a community doing transformational work. That's what our nonprofit does, is we bring about solutions that will change the world around the people that we serve. We change the world. I'll talk about that as it applies to you as a podcast listener later. But I was talking about how we build transformation by setting values for the community, for everyone to come around with shared values to do something significant in the community. And a guy raised his hand. He was a pastor. He says, I don't want you coming to my community talking about values. He said, because the church, the faith community, owns what real values are. Now, I'm a person of faith, Tracy. You are too. We love our faith, and we don't. This podcast is not about our faith, but I love my faith. And I just went, sir, you think that a church owns the concept of values? That's as humorous to me as people that says, I want to stay away from values because they make me think of faith. No.
Yeah.
There are values that we can have. Don't be as crazy as my friend that thought we shouldn't be talking values because the church market owned the values.
Right.
Don't be just as crazy on the other side that says, I don't want values because that makes me think too much of faith. There are values that we all have that are universal and will help us honor one another and show people around us that they're significant. That's why one of our key values in our company is people. It's the first value we all state.
Yeah.
We value one another. Because when you value something, you will add value to others with that something. When there's something of value in someone, so we value people so we can add value to them.
That's right.
And I would just challenge all of us to really take a moment and discover, what do you value? I'm certainly going to be doing that with my 9-year-old this weekend.
Sure.
What do you value, and how do you begin to put value to that? And then how do you use what you value to add value to others? So I love this topic, and I believe every organization should have stated values that would join the team and show the purpose of the organization, and every individual should know their values as well.
I agree. And I'm curious, when you kind of took the reins and this and John's organization and teams became your organization and teams, did you feel any pressure, or was it different the way that you kind of led and stated and highlighted the values of the team when you kind of took the reins, or did you kind of? That's kind of a weird line, I would think, as the founder, when we went from founder to foundation, but really it was the leader to the next gen leader from John to you. Was it awkward? Was it how does that go in succession when you become the next leader of John's mantle, carrying John's mantle, but also bringing values. How did it change much, or was it different or the same?
Yeah, and let me see if I can add value to leaders that are in the middle of succession, because some of our podcast listeners are right in the middle of succession. I believe great succession comes when there is a common agenda that both leaders can say there was purpose to the agenda of the leader that is being succeeded, and there is purpose to the agenda of the successor.
Right.
And when you can find those common components, that should be your agenda and your platform for many years, not just to make the transition smooth, but you should find common things that link the past to the beginning. So I can truly say there's not one value that John listed in this lesson and the values that we live out today that are in competition with each other. I state them perhaps a little bit different, maybe a little more relevant with today's time, maybe a little more succinct with one word rather than four. But really, if you go to the root and the lived out expression of the values that we have today and the values that John had for 40 years as owner of this organization, there's not any difference.
Yeah.
A couple of ways to say it, maybe a few ways to demonstrate it a little differently, a little more current age, but at the foundation level. Let me give you an example.
Great.
John and I, the business, the organizational structure, the stuff that nobody cares about but are very important, the organizational structure of the organization changed on January the 6th of 2020. I, in essence, bought it. If something was problematic, if there was a legal issue, there was a financial issue, it was all mine. That all happened in one fell pen swoop on January the 6th, 2020.
Okay, let's just pause to talk about that's the timing of that.
Yes.
January of 2020.
6 weeks later.
Oh, my goodness.
6 weeks later, I'm forced with a decision to cancel a $4.5 million event that I was on the line contractually to have to pay.
Wow.
With an organization, with a hotel in Orlando, Florida.
Wow.
But to keep that event going, which I could have, I had people under contract. I had their money. They had to come or lose their money. The hotel was going to make me pay, even though everything was shutting down around it. And I made a decision that was going to cost us $4.5 million because of why? Because to get people to travel from 56 countries in that time in January, again, the world had not shut down yet, would not have been valuing people. It would have been valuing the contract I had with those people, and the families would have been worried, and come to find out many of them would have been stuck in the United States with no travel home.
What a nightmare.
And when that started coming down, I didn't have contractual backing. I didn't have legal ramifications. In fact, all I had was, if I'm going to be held to a contract, then I'm going to hold the people that's supposed to pay me for this event to a contract, and let's just let the world figure itself out. But our values said we value people more than profit. We value our teammates, our clients, our partners more than we value whether we're going to have an event or not. And I had to make, in the first 4 weeks of ownership to where the buck stopped with me, I had to make a decision. Is our value of valuing people really bigger than $4.5 million? And thankfully, because John Maxwell has mentored me, and he was mentoring me then, at the same time, we were able to make the right decision. Our people are more important than contracts.
Wow.
Our people are more important than the potential ramification of $4.5 million. And by the way, all of that $4.5 million did not go away. Some of my contractual obligations still had to be paid without that. And we've been very fortunate, very blessed to be able to get through that. But the value is valuing people. Do we value people? And fortunately, in that case, we did.
Wow.
We got some other cases we need to grow and be better on, but let's talk about the good ones for a moment.
Well, talk about it all coming down to the line. I mean, right, like your first testing of a leader, owning that is being, when John says it influences and guides my personal behavior, that you personally, before you even led your organization, as now like the ink has barely dried on your contract, and you have had to make a personal, you in your most private moment have to make that personal decision that no one else really knew you were making those decisions, and you had to make the decision: will my will my values influence and guide my behavior in this, that really set the tone for your whole leadership. Because you could have gone a different way and it would have gone down a totally different path. And that's really putting your money truly where your values are.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So let's kind of in the same vein, he went on to talk about the values of the organization are like, and then he listed a bunch of cutesy little things like John always does, like the glue, the foundation, the ruler, the compass, the magnet, the identity. Okay, so before we go to the next group, on those little cutesy things, he gave examples of, a ruler sets the standard for the team's performance, a compass gives direction and guidance, a magnet attracts like-minded people, and identity defines and identifies who the team is. So it sets the standard and the foundation for who they are. So when you hire and onboard people and you're saying this is who we are. But I have to imagine that if you have a team and somebody doesn't do the job and you need to, this might be a little bit of a personal question for you actually, but if somebody doesn't do the job and you need to release them and you have to have hard conversations because that's what leadership is, that's one thing. But have you ever been in a position where when you set the foundation and the standard for the team's performance and given direction and guidance and have attracted who you thought were like-minded people, but then have you had to release people, have the hard conversations, not based on work performance necessarily, but because they did not identify with the values of your team? Because that's where it gets a little more tricky, but because it's not about performance-based necessarily, but their values, but it's really where you protect the culture and the values that you truly stand for and guard in your team.
Oh, often. And any leader that has not transitioned a teammate or unempowered a leader because of values, I would tell you that leader that is not addressing that has cancerous behavior all throughout his or her organization. Mm-hmm. Because values is the driving factor of why one person should be hired, and it is also the driving factor of why a person should be transitioned. Mm-hmm. And not because everyone needs to have the same values, but when the values of an organization are the values of a vision, are the values of a program or a product launch, when those values cannot be demonstrated in the behavior of leadership, mm-hmm. You're not a product of the product. You're not living out what you're supposed to be. And that is only sustainable for a short time. I've also lived and worked and tolerated and been around leaders that did not share my values for a specific time. And it wasn't that the values weren't important. It wasn't that I was turning my head that the values were not being lived out. There was an ongoing leadership conversation about those differences of values and how temporary that assignment was going to be if the values were not infectious enough to be embraced by the leaders around you. But in every situation, if you have a leader or a group of people on your team that are not living out your corporate values, there is a reckoning day coming.
Yeah.
When it comes, because the art of leadership is about timing, right? Mm-hmm. When it comes, be willing to have the candid conversation that this is not a performance separation. This is a value separation. Mm-hmm. We're just not at a place to where our values being different can be effective any longer. Mm-hmm. And I've been, again, in situations, in relationships, in work environments, to where the lack of congruency at the value level is known but tolerated for a certain period of time, for a certain particular reason. But there will always come a time when there's a lack of value connection to where that will be a reason for a separation.
And John will talk about where if you don't acknowledge, this is a fine line too, because John will talk about if you don't acknowledge it to your team that you see it and you know it, especially if you're in that tolerating season, your team can lose confidence in their leader because they think the leader doesn't see it. Especially if they've complained about it or reported it or discussed about something. And so how do you protect the values of the team in the tolerance stage without gossiping and without feeding the gossip mill?
Well, one is, I think every leader, an assignment of leadership is a willingness to be misunderstood. If it's true what John says, that leaders see more and before, that's true at the personnel level, that's true at the personal level, that's true at the professional level, that's true at the vision level.
Yeah.
Leadership is about seeing more and before. John talks that. I believe it. You know it. You've done that. So then, therefore, a byproduct of seeing more and before is also being misunderstood more and before. Mm-hmm. So one is I think you have a tolerance. You have to have a tolerance as a leader to feel, be, and actually realized as a misunderstood leader, because you see a reason, you see a purpose. I think the second thing is you've got to create an environment to where when something is bothering someone so much to the point that is affecting performance or affecting their ability to buy in, you've got to create an environment that they can initiate that conversation. Because sometimes I think leaders initiate a difference of values conversation in a way and in a time that is destructive rather than constructive. They either bring it up to protect themselves because they're scared about being misunderstood,
right?
Or they address it with the individual, and you haven't given that individual time enough to see if there is a values alignment that can be had. And so again, it comes back to why I said that this is an art of leadership issue because it's timing. It's not a practical or a practice or one of the 21 laws of leadership issue. It is an art of leadership issue in knowing the timing, knowing how to deal with it, and knowing how to communicate that to your team.
Yeah, and just making sure that one of your clear values is that gossip is a cancer in the organization, and making sure that there is that open ear policy, that open door policy, that they can approach you as the leader and you can have that private conversation with the people who are concerned, but letting them know to come to you rather than gossip and turn that.
It's no better than a values match, because I don't value gossiping just like I don't value a value misalignment. Yeah,
that's right.
Have you ever had somebody kind of walk into your life as a friend, and the moment that you met them, everything began to be bigger in your life? What you saw about life, just kind of, the picture just got bigger. If that's the case, then you're going to really like my friend Elmer Towns, who was probably my first official mentor. At the age of 24, began to put me under his wings and mentor me. And the word today I'm in it with Maxwell is big picture. Well, let me give you context so you'll understand what an important influence he really had on my life. I started off my pastorate in a very small community in southern Indiana called Hillham. And when I say small, I mean really small. 11 houses, 2 garages, 1 country store. That's Hillham. That's where I started. In fact, the first Sunday, there were only 3 people in church, and 2 of them were my wife, Margaret, and me, and then some elderly lady who lived beside the church, whose name was Maud. Just Maud, Margaret, and me. That's how I started. Very, very small. But while I was there in that rural, small setting, I had a desire to do something much bigger than what my community was. Didn't know how. And then one day I picked up a book by Elmer Towns on America's fastest growing churches. And I read that book, and then he wrote another book on the 10 largest churches in America. And all of a sudden he began to expand my mind. I'll never forget, I found out that he was going to speak in Waterloo, Iowa at a conference. And so I booked a plane and went out to Waterloo, Iowa, and I was so nervous during a break as I went up to shake his hand and tell him that his books influenced my life and that he was really helping me. And I'll never forget, he just kind of loved me. And in fact, he said, tomorrow morning I'm leaving for Chicago. Would you like to go with me? And I said, of course I'd like. I didn't live in Chicago, but if that's where he was going, I wanted to go. And we sat together on that plane, and he began to pour into me. We went then to the United Club Lounge afterwards for maybe another hour before we parted ways. And he marked my life that day because he gave me a picture of people that were doing bigger and better things than I had ever in my own mind imagined. He stretched me. He took me completely out of everything I knew and out of my comfort zone and said, John, there's a big world out there. Go take it. Go for it. And I did. Elmer Towns, who I affectionately call E.T., literally has always stretched me. He's always caused me to take the next step and to go just a little bit higher. I'm so in love and indebted to him for who he is and what he means to me. Recently, I was at a conference in Birmingham, Alabama, and there he was, attending the conference, 88 years old now, sitting on the second row, just taking notes, and during breaks coming up and saying, John, wasn't this great? And look what I learned in that last session. And I looked at Elmer and I thought, oh my, he still sees a picture bigger than himself. He sees it for himself. He sees it for others. He saw it for me. That's why I have Minute with Maxwell with you. I see a big picture for you, perhaps bigger than what you see for yourself. That's why I love coming every day into your life and doing my best to do what E.T. has done for me. Just let you see a big picture, a bigger one than perhaps you've seen before. And remember this, you'll fill that picture because you'll grow to what you see.
We're going to talk about another kind of phrase, simple as Perry talked about. You may have heard about it, the urgent versus important and the quadrant, the kind of the 4-box quadrant that many of you may be familiar with. This was actually developed, and I didn't know this until you educated me on this, but by President Eisenhower. Yeah. And then, Stephen Covey made it famous in how you are focusing on your priorities. So in your learner's guide is a picture of this. It's a matrix where you're going to see it's a 4-box or a 2x2. 2x2 is how you call it. Matrix, yeah. So you got 2 boxes on top, 2 boxes right underneath. They're connected together. Now, when you see it, you'll understand it. Let me try to help if you're not able right now to download the learner guide. So as you think about this, the 2 boxes that would be kind of across the top, above them are 2 labels, and it's urgent and then not urgent. And then down the side of the box, you have 2 other labels, which is important and not important, okay? And so one of the things that you mentioned in here is as we look at this, we want to be working above the line. So the top half of that 2x2 matrix, we want to be working up in that quadrant. And when we look at it, you're going to see one of those boxes is urgent and important, and the other one is not urgent and important. So when we talk about this, Perry, and you put this in here, working above the line and focusing on those important things, why is that so important? Why bring this to their attention as we're talking about kind of the priorities and what we're doing and what we're working on daily?
Yeah, it's working above the line is just, if we're below the line, I'm working on things that are by definition not important. And they could be urgent and not important, or but not urgent and not important. But either way, they're not important. So I always like the idea of just asking myself during my day, am I working above the line? And that's a really great place to start. Also, the matrix is interesting. And for so many years, I just said, that's interesting, urgent and important. And I put it away because most of the teaching on this is that we spend the majority of our time, we're very tempted to be sucked into quadrant 1, upper left, that is urgent and important. It has to be handled right now. It's urgent and important. It could be an urgent customer call. The phone is ringing, but it's a client. I've got a deadline. Things that are happening that are urgent and important. Urgency can be caused by the nature of the work. It can also be caused by the nature of the person asking you to do the work. If John Maxwell calls my phone and says, Perry, I need something, it just, whether I think it's urgent or not, it's irrelevant. It's now urgent. I need to handle that. Mark Cole calls me, I'm probably jumping on that right away, unless he gives me a reason not to. And I noticed that urgent things have a funny way of sounding important. And so what I love about the matrix and what I've been applying in my own life, and I've been teaching it as much as I can, is to have a small version of this that I can look at, and then look at the things on my calendar, the things on my to-do list, however you're capturing your inputs. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. But if I ran it through the matrix, just ask yourself, okay, someone's asking me to do something, run it through the matrix. So the first question you ask is, just looking at the column to the left, is it the urgent column? So the first question I want to ask myself, is it urgent or not urgent? Who's asking? What's the ask? And I think the biggest learning I could give you on this is your matrix. Yeah. This is not someone else's matrix. And because I did this exercise in class, and I give them here's an email that just came in, and it's in the headline. It says, "Urgent, very important. Need to see you right away. I was in a meeting. Somebody pushed me around. I need to talk to you. I didn't like it. Whatever you think." And I see how many people in the room put that in the urgent and important.
Yeah.
Why'd you put it in urgent and important? Well, it says urgent and important. Is it urgent to you?
Yeah.
Is your matrix? No, it's not urgent to me. Is it important to you? No, it's going to depend who the person is.
Yeah.
It's a close friend. It's somebody on my team. It's important. So I label these quadrants. If it's urgent and important, the word you put in there, and you can see it in the Learn Guide, is do. I need to do it probably right now.
Yeah.
If it's above the line, but it's not urgent but important, so in this instance, it's a friend of yours, they're having a meltdown, they need to vent, it's urgent to them, it's not urgent to you, it's important to them, it's probably important to me, I need to help my friend. I put it into the not urgent and important. That the word I have in there is schedule. I can't see you right now because I'm busy doing focus work. I can talk to you at 4:30, or I can talk to you tomorrow morning, or I can talk to you after hours, whatever it is. But I said, urgent and important, I need to do it. Not urgent and important, I need to schedule it. What if it's below the line? It happens to be urgent, but it's not important. There are things like that appear. This could be a ringing phone that's not an irate customer.
Yeah.
It's just, I can delegate. The word I have there is delegate. It probably needs to be done, but maybe not by me. It's not important. It's below the line. And then the final quadrant to the far right, bottom right, is not urgent, not important. It is don't do, dump it, get rid of it. Somebody asked me in the class, do you ever just never do anything in quadrant 4? Because quadrant 4 things about not urgent, not important could be checking the sports scores, surfing the internet, looking at my social media. Of course I do that, but I want to be intentional about it, saying, is it knocking me out of something that's important above the line, because I'm vegetating below the line over here in the bottom quadrant. But I do it intentionally. I schedule. I don't just doom scroll. I don't just stay. I do it, and then I move on to the next thing on my list.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this, and that you're giving us this as a resource, because we do become just busy in life, and both professionally and personally. And I love this image. It's very probably familiar to a lot of people. But I love the spin and kind of how you've labeled these 4 quadrants to kind of help us get there mentally of what we need to do. And I love that we're included in the show notes, so you can print that off, fold it up, maybe tape it on your wall, put it on the computer in front of you. And I think if you can develop the skill that Perry's talking about, you can overcome 95% of what's really killing you as being focused and being productive for the organization.
Well, it's hard. I've watched people do it in these workshops we do, and they're actually taking their own calendar, their own to-do list, and saying, "Well, my boss really wants this. Okay, does that make it urgent, or can it be scheduled? Does it have to be done right now?" And we have these distractions that somebody sticks their head in and says, "Could you do this? Could you do that?" It's urgent to them. Doesn't make it urgent to me. It's important to them. Doesn't make it important to me. But there's a lot of criteria that goes into this. So you have to decide, but you need to be discriminating about, I don't need to do that right now. I can schedule that. I don't need to do that at all. I can delegate that. I don't need to do that at all. I can dump that.
Yeah,
and you can really find your way. Number 4 was setting clear boundaries for yourself and your team. This is something I learned very late in my development as a leader, that if there are it's like the fence around my yard. It tells me what's mine and what's someone else's. And if there are no fences, it's like the Wild West of the United States. It's that open prairies, everything's in play. And if everything's important, nothing's important. So it's going to be difficult for my team especially to know what to work on if everything seems urgent and important. So I want to put some fences up to say, this is what I want you focused on, and this is what it's okay not to focus on.
Yeah.
Asked a group this week, and a young lady, I said, how do you communicate priorities to your team? And she said, I send an email every day or every week telling people, every week, this is what's important this week. We should be doing this. I said, I don't know a lot of leaders that do that, but maybe that's a good idea for you.
Yeah, yeah, love that. The question, too, that comes to my mind, which we've shared before, is are you doing only things that you can be doing for the organization? That's a great question to be asking as a leader. But what I love about where you're going here is that you're not only doing this for yourself and your leadership, but you're encouraging your team to do that. Now, leaders, listen, the only negative side of that is they may not see things as urgent as you do at times, but you need to be aware of that because you want to walk them through that process so that they're not easily pulled away from what the priority is, versus maybe somebody that is knocking on the door a little bit loudly because it is urgent. It is urgent to them. And so I think part of this, which is brilliant, is really helping your team understand the boundaries of what they need to be working on versus what they can kind of put off and put in a different quadrant, maybe ignored, but maybe just put off to a different time.
It could be timing.
It could be timing, yeah.
Finally, number 5 for me was if you really want to move from just being busy to being productive is having a system. And how do you capture inputs? I mentioned that earlier, but there's a lot of things. People making requests, your boss asking for projects, even personal requests, the family asking this, and how do I capture all that? I'm getting emails, phone messages, text messages. I've got things coming at me. Somebody left something on my desk the other day. Could you handle this? Those are all inputs. And so what do I do with that? And do I run them through the matrix? This is being asked of me. Is it urgent? Is it important to me? And do I need to do it right away? Do I need to schedule it? Do I need to delegate it? Do I need not to do it? And really then allows me to say, this is my high priority, big rocks, focused list of what I'm going to do, and now I can execute. I can really do focused work on that. But I find most people don't have a system for capturing inputs. They just it comes in and they leave it in their email. They leave it on a text message stream or something. They don't pull it out and put it into the system to say, this is how I'm going to capture on a list. I'm going to capture it in my calendar. I'm going to schedule an appointment with myself to do that, to designate that time and be very intentional about that. And it really led to, understanding that I call it the yes-no paradox, is that when I say yes to something that came into me, I've said no to everything else I could do during that time.
Yeah.
And I just want to be intentional about that.
So can I ask you a question? I'll put you on the spot. My intentional strategy may not be a good one. I just want to see what you think about it. I tend to have 43 sticky notes all over my desk.
The sticky note strategy.
So I guess you'd probably frown upon that.
Yeah, I would frown upon. Although capturing them on sticky notes as they come in is not bad. And then transferring them into your system would be great. But you leave them stuck all around your computer screen, that is not a good.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, if I'm being honest with you. So even just last night before we recorded, I was at home and pulled out my briefcase, and there was about 10 different sticky notes, and I was like, well, I got to do something with that. So I did transfer it at least to a piece of paper. What I didn't do, and what I should have done in that moment, was begin to label per the quadrant to know what I needed to attack coming out of there. So, well, listen, as we wrap up, you made me think about a quote that I heard from Craig Groeschel, where he said, "You don't grow in your yeses, you grow in your nos." To your point, this is a structure to help you do that. And we are about growth personally, and this is an important area as basic, and you may have seen some of what we've talked about today and heard it before, but I want to encourage you as we get up and running in the new year that this is something that you can definitely implement that will help you do that. And be very clear about what is important for you and then also for your team members. There's so many distractions.
Oh, man.
And social media is a big bucket, but there's a lot of distractions in the environment. And if we don't have a system in place to where we can follow, that we can rely on, a framework, then we are going to just be busy and not productive. Well, today's topic, we're going to talk about, I love where we're going, and we're going to do a little mini series here. Mm-hmm. I think there's 3 books that for what we do in organizational development and culture and working with teams that really stand out when it comes to that. One, obviously being the 5 levels of leadership. Right. That's our methodology. The second one is Leaders' Greatest Return. It's really talking about developing people and the power of that. And the third one is leaderships. These are shifts that leaders have to make often. And so today's topic is why leaders have to make the shift from goals to growth. Right. So I love where we're going on this around leadership.
Yeah, the whole idea about shifts that a leader needs to make comes up quite a bit in coaching conversations. One that I think we've done a podcast on it before was on, and it's number 1, the first shift in when you read the book, about making the shift from being a soloist to being a conductor. And so that if you're used to you're an individual contributor and you're really good at what you do, and one day they tap you and say, "Hey, we'd like you to lead the department or lead a team," now you're the conductor of that orchestra. You're not just playing in that orchestra. It's a completely shift in how you think and how you act to get not just your own performance, but to get performance from others. So I thought leadership, as well as some of these shifts that we're going to cover in the next couple of episodes, will be things that I see quite a bit.
And as leaders, we have to be open to change, and we have to be changing. And that's why I love this. Like, we should always be thinking about the shifts that we're making. So today we're going to talk about where the shift from goals to growth that John's going to lead us through with this content pieces that we're just going to kind of take back and forth here. And when you start out as a leader, we talk about this in the 5 levels of leadership, where we get a position and then what do? We immediately want to just start producing. We want to start hitting our KPIs, and we make a mistake to where we kind of maybe don't grow, but we also just kind of jump right over connecting with our people. And so we think that kind of hitting our numbers and the KPIs, whatever your KPIs might be, will make you a better leader. It'll increase your value. And while it does, and from an external standpoint, really from an internal standpoint, you got to be growing on the inside to be able to keep producing and growing outside and hitting those KPIs. And so we are big here at Maxwell Leadership about it being a growth focus versus a goal focus.
Yeah, I love that shift from growth outward to growth inward.
It's good.
I mean, to me, that's saying if you shoot for goals, that you'll achieve the goals, but you may not grow. And it's funny, that meeting I had this morning with the client, they're talking about we get so focused on the scoreboard, on the revenue or the expenses or whatever what your measurement is, we forget to look at the daily growth that we're making as individuals to work toward that. So how do you make this leadership? And so I don't think it's 5, I think it's maybe 7.
Doggone it.
I know you're being disappointed in me. But number 1, embracing change, that growth means change. And if you want to become a better leader and a better person, then you have to shift from this fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And mindset really is important in this shift. I think that I've got to be. We talked a little bit on the previous podcast about fixed versus growth. Carol Dweck and the research she does, but I can't say enough for having that mindset that I'm here to grow.
Yeah,
everything I do.
Yeah, and I remember what I just said a minute ago. Having influence and being a leader, it doesn't require change. Change is going to happen, right? So get ready for it. And we have this phrase that we say where if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance a whole lot less. And so you just need to be aware of that and know that that's going to happen. And so you got to embrace it, as Perry talked about, as we begin to think about this from a growth standpoint. And the fixed mindset leaders, they don't like it. They don't like necessarily the change. And so they think it leads to, well, it's about failure, and I am failing, and I need to change. All those things that kind of go with that when we hear the word change, and how does it affect me? Versus if we have a growth mindset, back on this mindset thing about change, then we'll embrace the change. We'll embrace the learning and the growth that we will go through. I mean, you think about this, anything that we change or do a little bit differently, at the end of the day, we've learned something. Versus having that repetitive mindset.
It doesn't mean we like change any more than anybody else.
No, not at all. Yeah,
but I see it in a different light. Is that I'm going to go and you think about it. Your whole life is about change. You wouldn't be where you are if you didn't change. Yeah. So, but we look at it with a different view. You say I'm going to go through this because I'll be better on the other side.
I mean, the only reason that we now have over 3 million downloads is because you heard my very first one and you said, Chris, I think we need to embrace change.
I love you.
So I've grown through this process, and I give all that credit to you. And what we've created today, though, right? Like just continually changing. So
right. Well, the word that you made me think of is the word teachable. That
there we go. Yeah, there we go. And so our next point here, great segue.
You were so teachable. Yeah. But it's a fantastic characteristic for a leader. And so, the question I always ask people on a coaching call, how teachable are you? And so how do you become more teachable if you decide and I think it builds trust with people when you say, when they view you as a teachable leader, that you don't have all the answers. You're always seeking to learn more. You're asking them to help you grow. You're observing. You're curious. Lots of things like that. But you're looking for growth opportunities in every situation. You ask questions. You are curious. You seek out information from others. You file. John's big about filing what you've learned so that you can recall it. And then my favorite is passing on what I'm learning to others. I notice that the more I teach people, the more it sticks with me to do that. So,
real quick, before you go to the next point, one of the things I was thinking about under this and having a teachable spirit and being okay with the failure side of things, which that's a strong word, but just the whole teachable spirit. We talk about the success cycle to where John talks about, hey, listen, try something, right? You're going to fail, then you're going to learn, then you're going to improve, then re-enter again. And so whether it's this podcast, whether it's leading a meeting, whether it's a new process or a system, be teachable through understanding that that's going to be a success cycle and a process that you're going to go through. Try it. Know you're going to fail. What are you going to learn? Be teachable through that. Then improve it and then re-enter and do it again.
I'm smiling because I was in a meeting yesterday and one of our teammates asked me, didn't you write about this on a podcast or a blog? I went, yeah, let's pull that up. And I pulled it up, and as she was looking at it, I was looking at it, I go, did I write this? It was like episode 12 or something. It was a long time ago. I go, oh my gosh.
At least it wasn't one when you said, hey, look, can we do this together?
All right. Okay.
Hey, podcast listeners, do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download Clear by Maxwell Leadership. It's the new free app where our expert guides help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Clear app, including this podcast, and information on upcoming events such as our International Maxwell Conference this August. This upcoming conference will be like no other, so be sure to download Clear by Maxwell Leadership in your app store and register today.
Okay, number 3, make your love for learning greater than your fear of failure. I thought that was an interesting teaching to say, how big is this fear that I may have that I might not get it right? That can I make that idea that I want to grow? I'm willing to grow greater than that. Don't count losses. He says, John says, don't count losses, count lessons. I thought that was pretty good.
I love that. Don't count losses, count the lessons. Because what do? Naturally, as human beings in the flesh, we go, man, I don't have this anymore. I lost that, or I didn't do this right. Versus, man, I learned this and I learned that. So I absolutely love that, which goes into a book, that John wrote. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
Yep.
And I just think it's a powerful lesson. Well, number 4 is develop relationships with other growing people. This may be one of the strongest points that we're going to talk about today, because a rising tide raises all boats. And I know I've had the privilege of working in and around this organization for a long time, over 23, 24 years. I started when I was 5. And just being around this environment, we're in a bubble, is what we call it. It's a leadership bubble. We're challenging personal growth all the time. But I think when you're around these type of people, the easier it is for you to grow and to get, and because it becomes contagious. And so be the difference maker. Take that step and be that person for your team or your organization, and bring people around you. I was talking the other day with somebody, and we started talking about the fact that if you look at the people that you're hanging out with, what are the conversations about? Are they all about, man, you remember when we did that? Remember when it was this? Or, man, this is what I'm learning, and this is where I'm going, and this is what I'm trying. That right there, just the next conversation you're in when you go out, for a social event, you're hanging out with couples or people where, just be aware of that and listen to that and the tone of the conversation, because you want to be around those that are saying, man, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm reading, you do that all the time to me, right? Like, this is I was reading this book the other day, I was listening to this and I learned that, and I'm just like, holy cow. So it just encourages me to be growing.
But that's two-way. I was just thinking the same thing, is that you do that to me and our team. We're looking at what are you learning this week? What are you reading?
Yeah.
And a week doesn't go by somebody asks me, what are you reading now? Even my coaching clients are now saying, hey, what should I be reading?
Yeah.
So that, because we're in these conversations that we all realize we've got some growth to do.
Yeah.
Number 5, develop greater humility. Remember, we're going from goals to growth. How do I develop more humility? And this humility is really about the essence of being unafraid to admit when we're wrong or what we don't know, and being able to, it's like self-awareness and humility kind of tied in together here, about recognizing the gap that I could be filling by spending some time each day investing in me.
Yeah.
And when I admit that I'm wrong, then I'm on a path to discover what's right, and it just opens me up to learning more.
Which this is about self-awareness, and being having that humility to be open to that, and that feedback from other people, maybe also some tools. We often will talk to leaders and say, hey, the longer that you have led, you've been with the team, maybe you're in that fixed mindset, right? You're in that goal mindset, probably the more unaware you are of really what's going on,
right.
The pace of your growth, the pace of your leadership, what does it look like to be on the other side of your leadership? And so I think that humility side and the self-awareness is something that you should really look at when it comes to moving from goals to growth. Number 6, believe in yourself. This is just really about, do you believe that you're worth it? You listen to a podcast, you maybe listen to an Audible book, maybe you attend a workshop, maybe you begin some coaching. Like, believe in yourself, to invest in yourself and what you're learning. And when you believe in yourself and you invest in yourself, you'll begin to move from goals to growth.
Yeah, and the last one, I really would love your opinion on this before I let you wrap it up. But John used the phrase, and I thought it was interesting, about embrace layered learning.
Yeah.
And to me, you just gave a one part of that, which is, how do I do learning? Am I doing podcasts? Am I looking at books? But I'm also, for me, it's so much of what we do. I'm studying and I'm learning and I'm investing in me, and then I go out and apply it. I do experience and I try something, and I do it on a coaching call, or I do it in front of an audience. In my world, so much I do a lesson and I get feedback, and now I'm adding to that. So I feel like I'm layering. But I wonder, how do you see layered learning when John speaks of that?
Yeah. So this is just a continuous growth mindset. Period. Piling on. This encompasses everything that we just talked about. Whereas if the previous 6, if you're doing them well and you're moving from goals to growth, what's going to end up happening is you're just going to continue to see growth principles and movement, right, laying on top of each other. And so you're going to continue to see that layered learning, which hey, take a chance, take a risk, learn something, and then you're going to learn something more. And then but if you never take that step and begin learning, you'll never have the opportunity to experience layered learning.
Yeah. I think, Coach Bill Walsh years ago, San Francisco 49ers, but he had a phrase that kind of upset people, because he said, the score will take care of itself. And I thought, no, you're the head coach. That's all we're about, is the score. And he said, no, if you invest in yourself, if you do the right things, if you are brilliant on the basics, if you're learning and growing and improving and growing and improving and growing and improving, score will take care of itself. I thought, isn't that true? And we get so focused on the goal, the scoreboard, that we don't do the daily things we should be doing.
Yeah.
And that the goals will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.